Savior. Written by Sparrow 9642. Chapter 1. The Party. The final bell rang for the last class, the classroom erupting into the chitter-chatter and culmination of footsteps of Twilight's fellow classmates. The wave of students made their way out the door, out into the hallway as the bell silenced, being replaced by the ambience of your usual school hallway. Twilight preferred not to get caught in the chaos of students rushing to get out of the prison they called school, and normally waited for the chaos to pass to even get out of her seat. Thus why she was still rested in her provided desk, with a gentle fake smile on her face and her arms out in front of her, her thumbs dancing in patience. Once she was sure she was safe from getting caught in any storming waves of young adults, she stood up from her desk and made her way into the hall, still occupied by what she could estimate as close to half of the school's population of students. Twilight paid them no attention and continued her usual pace to the closest exit. She wasn't really a social type of person and didn't have many friends at all. It wasn't that she was incapable of making friends. It was because Twilight had never cared to have any. It was for that particular reason that she received weird looks and was labeled an outcast or freak. As she strolled to her cheap car across the parking lot, she just focused on watching for vehicles, seeing the road devils of Canterlot High were not the wisest behind the wheel. Many had come close to being hit, but luckily there were no casualties on record. There had been vehicular-based accidents though. It wasn't necessarily the students' fault either, given the parking lot wasn't very wide, which meant that there wasn't much room to back out without getting fender bent. Twilight had figured out an alternative to this as well, and normally waited for all the reckless drivers to leave before even trying anything. Twilight pulled out her keys and unlocked her driver door, opening it and setting her heavy luggage of notebooks and literature books in the passenger seat across from her. In the console was her coffee from her nearest Star Bits that morning. It had turned into a foamy mess over the school hours, and while she could have just tossed it away in the nearest trash bin, her insecurities said otherwise. Her house wasn't that far either, so she shrugged away the thoughts, started the car, and let the AC bathe her skin. The car was like a sauna, seeing it had sat in the heat of one of the most hottest summers on record for a good amount of time. The heat was affecting everybody, even the jocks. They tried to play it off like they're stronger than the heat, but anybody smart would see that claim as a bunch of malarkey, especially considering that they are covered in sweat by the end of the ordeal. Black leather attracts the sun like a magnet, so the fact that it was the jock's choice of attire made them a bunch of imbeciles. Twilight basked in the cool air for a few minutes before deciding the green light was set, putting the vehicle into reverse and very solemnly backing out into the middle of the compact parking space. With careful focus and her ace driving skills, Twilight eventually found her way out, and with a shift in first gear at the exit of Canterlot High's grounds, Twilight took the right turn and headed home. During the small drive, she turned her volume nozzle to 20 and was met with the casual garbage that was music in today's society. While she didn't care for the music playing, she listened to it anyways, keeping her eyes on the road. She wasn't in a good mood, especially after fourth period's events. She had butchered her mile run, which was no surprise. Twilight had never been the athletic type and was normally a sweatbag by the end of the session. That wasn't why she was in a bad mood. It was what happened in the locker room while redressing that had ruined her day. The other girls that consistently liked to flaunt their bodies and talk about their fake relationships with their jock boyfriends decided to tone down their biased attitudes and had offered Twilight to come to a party that night. It was Friday after all, which meant no school the next day, or for the jocks and pretty girls, a day to get a hangover before a pop quiz on Monday morning. Twilight wasn't stupid. Normally, any other casual low-quality girl like her would freak out in joy over something like that. But Twilight wasn't like the other girls who bought into anything the pretty girls said. She knew better than to go into a hostile environment that was a perfect place for her to gain negative attention and be mocked in school as a laughingstock for weeks. Her already awkward behavior was enough of an indication that she was just being led into a trap. The pretty girls of Canterlot High were only out to destroy easy prey, and she was on the dining list. The fact that those girls even had the nerve to try and lure her into their idea of a social gathering had put a sour taste in her mouth. It would blow over by tomorrow, and until that time came, Twilight planned to just watch movies or read her currently bookmarked novels. She at least smiled at that thought. As she pulled into the driveway of her house and turned the key to off, she took a moment to sit back in her seat and take a deep breath. She let the breath out slowly and collected her school luggage, making her way out of the ancient relic that she called a vehicle and shut the door with a loud creak. The keys jingled in her fingers as she walked up to the front door and unlocked it, walking in and being greeted by her everyday living place. The only thing running was her air conditioner, while the rest of the house was draped in darkness. She quickly flicked on some lights and sat her school things down on the kitchen counter. Twilight wasn't surprised in the slightest. She was used to being home alone, which was part of the reason she carried a can of mace in her purse. The other reason was due to an assault in her past, nearly being sexually violated, until she pulled a good-fashioned strike to the groin and escaped to the nearest gas station where she called the police. The perpetrator had never been caught, but Twilight made sure to always have her weapon of defense at hand in any situation. Her parents had jobs that barely allowed them any time with their daughter, which is why Twilight was so used to their absence. At first, she found it very hard to get used to, but now it was second nature, even if she was affected by the lack of her parents at home. She understood why they had to do what they did, but just like any child, she wished she could have seen her parents for at least an hour of the day, but she had to be a big girl. She decided to cook herself some leftover chicken strips she had made the day before, seeing it was better than peanut butter sandwiches. She was practically burned out on those, and even the sight of them made her want to puke. The microwave dinged after 2 minutes, and Twilight took the plate of leftover poultry to her room, where she planned to occupy herself for the rest of the night. No weekend partying for her. She put headphones on and drifted away to the beats of Countess Coloratura as she ate her dinner slowly. She had made sure to lock her bedroom door and window before she took refuge on her comfy bed, not wanting history to repeat. Just in case, Twilight kept her purse close and the weapon within reach, and once she gobbled down the chicken strips, passed out into the warmth of her bed and music massaging her senses. All she saw before she passed out was the photo of her and her parents from years ago on her nightstand. Then, with 2 gentle flicks of her eyes, she was lost to her dreams. Four bangs on the front door brought Twilight out of her short dream she couldn't even remember. She slowly came out of the daze and debated on even answering the door. But after hearing the voice of one of her few friends, Serena, call from the door, she felt compelled to answer. She didn't want to be unintentionally rude or get an earful of it Monday morning, so she dragged her body out of the bed, unlocked the door, pulled her half-awake body downstairs, and opened the front door to her giddy brown-haired, green-skinned, and pink-eyed friend, her somewhat decent car running on the curb. "You look terrible, girl," Serena stated. "Did you just wake up?" Twilight yawned and wiped her eyes before answering. Serena immediately knew that her assumption was true. "As a matter of fact, I did," Twilight clarified in the best happy voice she could muster in her sleepy demeanor. What's up, Serena?" "Didn't you get the memo today at school? There's a party tonight and everyone is invited." Twilight wanted to grimace at the one thing she had not even wanted to think about for the rest of that day, but for Serena's sake, she just played nice. "Oh, right." Twilight replied dazedly. Yeah, I'm not really interested. Besides, I look like a mess, my hair's all messy, and you of all people should know that parties are not my jam. You look fine, Serena countered. Besides, there's no dress code, and you know as much as me that the majority of them are probably going to be drunk by the time we get there. Just spray some perfume on you and you'll be set for the show. Serena was heavily persistent, so Twilight just tried to express her thoughts on the whole idea through an expression that spelled annoyance and distaste. Serena had backed off just a little, but her persistence didn't give in. Tell you what, Serena proposed. We'll go for 1 hour, and if you're still not up for it, we'll leave. Twilight still didn't like the idea, but 1 hour didn't seem that bad. 1 hour usually flew by anymore, and if it would get Serena to stop her surprisingly efficient persuasion, Twilight was open. I really hate you sometimes, Twilight stated to Serena very groggily, not actually meaning it. Give me 5 minutes to get somewhat freshened up. But remember, 1 hour only. Gotcha. Serena complied. Now hurry, we don't want to wait around too long. Serena's last statement had ended in a happy dance and a joyous stroll back to her car. Twilight had turned back into the house and rushed back upstairs to clean herself up. Now she had wished she'd asked for 10 minutes than 5, considering she was rushing as if she had slept in on a school day. She changed her clothes and brushed her hair to where it was decent, then, as Serena had suggested, sprayed herself down with her usual perfume. It was a strong perfume that her mother had gotten her for Christmas the previous year. Twilight wasn't usually the type to wear perfume, so when she had opened the gift that morning, she had been surprised to say the least. She smiled at the thought, slipping on her casual tennis shoes and grabbing her purse. She double-checked that everything was locked before leaving, then ran out of the house to Serena's car. Serena was texting upon Twilight's arrival, opening the passenger door, taking a seat, and shutting the door behind her. Serena slipped her phone back into her jacket pocket and stated a few things before driving off. Good timing, Serena congratulated. 30 seconds to spare. Shows how you've managed to hold the perfect attendance record. Twilight immediately changed the subject. Remember, the deal is 1 hour. Twilight clarified. Once the time is up, if I'm not in on the party like everyone else, I want to be brought back home. Absolutely, Serena confirmed with sincerity. Just try to have a good time. I know it's not your thing, but please try to engage. If anything goes wrong, you have my number. Twilight nodded as an answer. Then Serena respectfully drove out of the curb, taking her vehicle in the direction of Pretty Girl Bella's house on the far side of the town. The drive mostly consisted of Serena's karaoke skills, occasionally bumping Twilight's shoulder to join in. Twilight just made the excuse that she didn't know the song by shrugging her shoulders, but Serena's spirits weren't dashed the slightest, continuing to sing to her heart's desire. Twilight merely admired the night sights. From the streetlights to the passing cars on the main highway they had to take to get to Bella's abode. Aside from the blaring music coming from Serena's stereo, the darkness was calm and quiet. Almost too quiet for Twilight. She couldn't explain it, but even at their current speed of 70 miles per hour, something seemed ominous, abnormal even. Isolating herself from the music and Serena's singing skills, she focused on the quiet of the darkness cast on the open highway. No other car was in sight, and the only light sources cast upon the open road were the headlights of Serena's car and the moon high in the sky. The humming of the engine cast a slight eeriness to the atmosphere currently enveloping Twilight's senses, sending her into a somewhat calmness, the car continuing to tread along in the dark night. The road seemed to turn into a desert of black sand, with the moon accompanying its horizon like a calming silence. Twilight almost felt mesmerized, continuing to stare at the moonlight in the distance, and as the ride continued, she had noticed that the hum had turned into a familiar rhythm. An old song that her mother had sang to her when she was young to help her sleep. It fluctuated perfectly, note for note. Pitch perfect. It was haunting, but at the same time, Twilight took delight in its calming rhythm, memories of her childhood flashing before her eyes in the calm. Her mother coming into her room after waking up in tears, having woken from a vivid nightmare. She'd run her soothing hand through Twilight's hair and calmed her with that same melody. The rhythm of the short melody would put her mind at ease, then her mother would kiss her on the forehead, shut her lamp off, and return to bed. Twilight hadn't realized that she had dozed off until she was shaken awake. Upon turning to Serena, the giddy girl eyed Twilight with worry. "Are you okay?" Serena gestured with concern. "Yeah? Why?" Twilight said in return. "Then why do you have a river of mascara down your face?" Serena questioned. Twilight jumped. She knew immediately that Serena wasn't joking. Her expression was as true as the blazing heatwave summer that was currently limiting outside activity. She pulled down the upper console mirror and was met with 2 streams of black below both of her eyes. It looked like she had cried a storm. Twilight felt a chill go down her back. She hadn't cried in her sleep since she was 9, and she hadn't even recalled falling asleep. She decided to just shake it off, not wanting to freak Serena out any further. "Oh, this has happened before." Twilight slightly lied. "It's no worry, Serena. However, what is a worry is going in looking like this." Serena just bought it, smiling as confirmation. "Don't worry, Twi. I got some spare napkins." Serena clarified. Serena quickly gathered up some napkins from her side door, handing them to Twilight. Twilight smiled, using her small mirror to wipe away the black streaks from her face. After a good 10 minutes, Twilight's face was finally clean of the mascara, and the 2 girls finally exited the car to what seemed like a maze of vehicles to a standard 2-story house. Twilight was relieved to see no police cars in the vicinity, as she and Serena found their way through the practical car sale lot to the entrance of the house. After 4 knocks, they were greeted with Bella in the open doorway, her sapphire blue eyes and blonde hair being a dead giveaway as confirmation. "Seems Twiggy and Pink Eyes made it after all," Bella greeted. "Come on in. The party's just getting started." While neither Twilight or Serena appreciated the greeting, they took it with a pinch of salt. Walking into the crowded house, Twilight immediately spotted what she had expected. Littered red solo cups, empty beer cans, dancing drunks, and sober partygoers chatting on the very spare furniture. It was literally like any party description in any book or movie she had put time into, word for word. She immediately knew to avoid the second floor at all costs, because if her analogy about this party being like any she had read about or seen in movies was true, she knew exactly what was going on up there, and she wanted no part of it. "Just keep your phone on you and call me if you need anything," Serena advised. "Meet me back here in that 1-hour limit if you are up to leaving. Just try to have a good time." Twilight nodded, grabbing her phone and setting an alarm for 1 hour from the current time of 11:23 p.m., then watched as Serena disappeared into the sea of young adults. As a good start to what would most likely be an hour of loud music, endless chatter, and a gagging smell of alcohol lingering amongst the large crowds of partygoers, Twilight poured herself a cup of the only thing that seemed like a non-alcoholic beverage, smelling it as an additional analyzation. Upon one sip, it was clear that it was just regular fruit punch, relieving Twilight, walking deeper into the house and trying not to puke from the heavy scent of alcohol. She found no reason to stay in the house, so she decided to just go back outside onto Bella's back porch. It took her a little bit to find the easiest way out, but once she did, she found herself taking a huge breath of fresh night air, being thankful nobody else had been outside and had seen her do so. The light of the large back porch greeted her with its calming light, and the quiet had seemed like a blissful remedy to the inside atmosphere of the party. Twilight walked to the porch's edge, guarded and barricaded by a wooden gate, sitting down her cup of punch on the flat top of the gate and letting her arms hang over the side. She felt so alien there, and really had no reason to be there except for bragging rights Monday morning. She wasn't one to brag about hanging with the cool kids, and treated something as such like a fluke. She could care less about being popular or looked at as a loser. Her past was enough to speak for her strength. She didn't need beauty or an expensive car to flaunt herself. She was Twilight, and that was all she was. Tough party. A male voice interrupted her train of thought. She turned her sights away from the darkness of the night to one of the fellow partygoers. The stranger was someone she didn't necessarily know well, but had seen wandering the halls of Canterlot High occasionally. He was mid-length in height with spiky black hair and blue eyes, and was wearing a dark blue t-shirt and gray shorts. His name was the only thing that Twilight was clueless about. Twilight, right? He guessed, surprising Twilight that he knew her name. Yeah. And you are? Oh, sorry. I forget that you're not really the social type. He apologized. My name's Brandon. My gym classmates talk about you a lot, so I know you based off description. Right. I suppose it's nice to meet you, Brandon. I can understand why you're all weirded out by it. Some guy joined you on a balcony and tells you he knows who you are from talking in a locker room. Trust me, I'm not like that. Believe it or not, I'm actually a lot like you. Just more outgoing. Twilight's insecure thoughts started to fizzle, starting to feel a little more comfortable in the company of Brandon. Regardless, she kept her concealed mace within reach, knowing just how easy a nice face can shift in a matter of seconds. I'm not the partying type of guy, and prefer to just enjoy the quiet. Not to mention that the scent of drunk people isn't the most pleasant. That comment caused both of them to laugh shortly, as the conversation shifted to Twilight. Once the two finished their laughter, Twilight's happiness seemed to dissipate like embers of a dying fire. This caused Brandon's mood to change as well. Many don't know this, but the reason I'm just quiet, shy, contempt Twilight is because I don't have anything to say. Twilight started. There's nothing interesting about me. I'm just a regular 17-year-old girl with hopes and dreams that probably will never come true. Just like everybody else here. Brandon unfolded his arms and inched a little closer within a distance he knew Twilight would find comfortable. Right now, I just feel like there's no reason to talk or associate with anybody. My life is really dull and blank. It feels like it's just going nowhere. Ever since my parents started working again, I felt alone and lost, and nothing I do seems to fix it. It's like I'm comatose, but I'm awake and wandering endlessly looking for happiness to fill the void I'm in again. Brandon approached Twilight even more, a look of sympathy on his face, and approached the Twilight aloud, feeling sadness come over her slowly. Her new party friend put a hand on her right shoulder, taking rein on the conversation. Listen, I know that's something you don't want to do, but the best way to combat the sadness you are feeling is to talk and associate with people more. Brandon proposed. I've actually seen the effect it's put on you over the past couple of years. I know we don't know each other, but a lot of people do care about you, even if it seems they don't. Like who? Twilight countered. Everyone sees me as weird, awkward, and a loser. So who would ever care for me? A mess. Well, there's that girl who brought you here, your parents, the majority of the school staff. Me. Then Twilight did something that even she didn't expect to do that surprised both her and Brandon. Out of nowhere, Twilight kissed Brandon, closing the remaining distance between them. Brandon knew it was just a desperate kiss and nothing serious, so he just waited for her to finish up. After a good 10 seconds, Twilight pulled away with a hot face. I'm sorry. Brandon just patted Twilight's shoulder and chuckled. Twilight didn't know what to think. Don't worry about it. He replied simply. Come on. Second punch is on me. He reached out one of his big hands, and while Twilight hesitated at first, she eventually took it in kind. However, just as she took it, Twilight muttered a tiny squeak of pain and suddenly collapsed to the porch's wooden surface. Brandon unfolded his large hand, allowing the rest of Twilight's small body to collapse. The center of his hand was now occupied with pale spines, some of the tips now occupied with her blood. Sorry, honey. Party's over. Brandon stated, walking toward her unconscious body and picking her up gently. He held her firmly as two wide wings manifested from his upper back and he prepared to take flight. His current position wasn't wide enough for his wingspan, so he folded his wings just enough to turn around. However, right as he turned, he was met with an immediate searing pain to his eyes, breaking all of his concentration and dropping Twilight again. Brandon screamed from the agonizing pain, trying his hardest to get the mace out of his eyes. The collapse had caused Twilight to come to shortly, her gaze meeting a blurry picture of a demonic version of Brandon screaming like a banshee, and another figure standing above her. They were gripping the pepper spray can and working quickly to get the situation under control. Twilight didn't even have time to react and passed out again. However, the unknown savior of Twilight reacted fast, grabbing Brandon by one of his arms and taking off into the sky like a rocket. The screams of Brandon had alerted the party guests closest to the porch door, and a mix of sober, drunk, and high young adults had come to the scene of Twilight's unconscious body. Serena was among the crowd and at first freaked out in horror, but eventually calmed after first aid was applied and was relieved that Twilight had a pulse. Someone had called an ambulance unbeknownst to Bella's knowledge, and while the result wasn't so good for Bella, Twilight would receive proper medical attention. Serena took charge, but little did she know that Twilight was very lucky to even be alive, and that the real person to thank was Twilight's secret savior. But who had saved Twilight? Only Twilight could answer that. A heart monitor is what Twilight awoke to, a groan following upon sitting up. Wiping her eyes free of her drowsiness, she yawned and suddenly jumped when she came to full realization on where she was. She was in a hospital bed in a hospital gown. Twilight rubbed her eyes again, only to be met with the same view of the large hospital room and the smell of disinfectant, but caught something else she hadn't noticed before upon rubbing her eyes again. Her right hand was bandaged. What happened? She questioned. She took a moment to reflect on what had led her here of all places. It all culminated like a rush of emotions. The party, Brandon, the sudden pain, the other person who had saved her from Brandon's betrayal. Was that all a dream? She questioned again. Then another culmination followed. The car ride. The strange hum that resembled her mother's melody. The ominous nature of it. The tears. Dear God, Twilight. You are a mess. Her self-rant was interrupted by her door opening, entering her parents. Upon seeing their daughter awake, they rushed over and embraced their daughter in a flood of hugs and kisses, as much as tears and concerns. Thank God you're okay. Her mother, Twilight Velvet, shrieked at a reasonable volume for a casual hospital visit. We came as soon as we heard. How did I get here? Twilight said drowsily, keeping the other details she knew of to herself. Oh, honey. You were rushed here after you were found unconscious by your friend Serena. Her mother explained. The doctors found a mild venom in your bloodstream, but they were able to clear it out before it could do any damage. Venom? Twilight questioned. Yes. It was administered through your palm, and that's supposedly what made you pass out. Immediately, all of the events of the party came back to her, flashing like a strobe light. She was completely baffled. It wasn't a dream. Why don't we let Twilight rest up some more? Her father, Nightlight, interrupted. She's going to need to speak with the police about it, and— The police are involved? Twilight exclaimed louder than she had intended. Calm down. Nightlight quickly capitalized. We'll go over everything later. For now, just try to get some rest, honey. Twilight nodded. Very good. Her father replied with a smile. Another bunch of kisses and hugs was received. Then she was left alone with only the ambience of the hospital to keep her company. The next few hours had consisted only of shock, breakfast, vitals checking, and more shock. The one thing Twilight couldn't decipher was two things. Why this all had happened, and who had saved her on the eve of her potential fate. She had recollected her thoughts so many times that she'd lost count, trying to figure out what could have led to all of this, and who would have bothered saving her. The porch had been occupied by only her and Brandon, and the door to the porch hadn't opened the entire time. It also couldn't have been someone sneaking from the second floor, because the back of the house was flat. Nobody could have intervened, so who saved her? Maybe the punch was spiked? Did I even drink enough to start seeing hallucinations? She gave up after her frustration started to affect the heart monitor's rhythm, and spent the remainder of her time watching television. But upon turning the TV on, she stared in horror. On the news was a story involving a train hitting something abnormal. One look at the grisly scene and seeing all too familiar wings in the wreckage, she knew now that what she saw was real. That meant her theory of the spiked punch was debunked. Her parents returned at lunch that day with the police, reading out Serena's witness statement and allowing Twilight to give her account of things. Miss Sparkle, I need you to try and remember everything that happened prior to passing out. The police officer informed. Please, give us an account on everything you can remember to the best of your ability. Yes, officer. Twilight agreed. She kept out all of her unusual happenings, saying they would not have believed her or thought that she was drunk during the entire series of events, and just told them word for word what had happened the previous night. It was the same song and dance that she had gone over multiple times earlier, up until the officer asked her one question that made her remember one specific detail about the assumed girl that had saved her from Brandon. Can you recall any specific details about the person who helped you? It clicked. There was one specific detail about the person that she remembered in the faint time she had been conscious at their feet. They had long, fiery hair. Chapter 2. A Day Straight from Hell. Monday came faster than Twilight could have anticipated. She was released from the ER not long after speaking with the police on the case of her worst party experience ever, and was practically back to normal. That wasn't how Twilight saw it, though. She was still noting anything else she could remember with no luck, and was dreading the return to school. If she hadn't already dreaded it enough, now she absolutely hated the idea of even going back to school. These were her thoughts as she continued to stare at herself in her mirror, continuing to apply her mascara. She knew deep down that there was nothing she could do about it, but her thoughts continued to bicker at her to just play sick or do something that she absolutely refused: skip school. For about the 100th time that morning, she shrugged the negative thoughts away with a shake of her head, messing up her straightened hair yet again. These were the times that Twilight was thankful she wasn't trying to impress anyone with her beauty. She didn't even consider herself pretty, and would rather stay under that radar than ending up in the ranks of girls like Bella. Finishing up applying her false mask of powder and goop, she grabbed an apple from the kitchen, her school requirements, car keys, and made her way out the door, locking it. She quickly made her way into the driver's seat, setting her heft of school supplies in the passenger seat, and started up the vehicle. The mornings were always cold, so she worked quickly to shift her AC to warm, giving the air blowing out of the vents time to shift in temperature before pulling out of the driveway. In that time, Twilight chomped into her makeshift breakfast and turned up her stereo. Countess Coloratura's voice embraced Twilight's eardrums, continuing to eat her breakfast, and double-checked that she had all of her school supplies with her before leaving. She had eventually found the pit and was relieved to know that she didn't have to make a second trip back into the house. The music track went dead, so Twilight took that as her cue to leave the driveway, setting the eaten apple in the center console and shifting the car into reverse. The rusty vehicle rolled out easily, and within 10 minutes, Twilight was parked in the school parking lot and collecting her luggage. The sun had started to peek over the horizon upon her arrival, and as she reached for the door handle, she paused, knowing that the day was going to be hell on wheels. She had even started to move her keys back toward the ignition, but a distant reminder of her perfect record stopped her, and she cussed in her mind at her self-acknowledgement. "Fuck you, me," she criticized to herself, opening the door and stepping out of the car, locking it before she left the area. Walking through the double doors with a push of her right hand, she was met like a spotlight. Even the volume of the hall had seemed to lower upon her arrival as she walked to her locker. The looks were blank, and that just made Twilight even more uncomfortable, hurrying to get her required accessories for the first period. This is exactly what she had expected to happen, and while she wasn't surprised, she didn't like all of this attention. This day is going to suck. She did her best to just close out all of the attention, grabbed her things, and hurried off to somewhere where she could exist in peace. The library. She had a good half hour before the bell rang, so she'd have some time to recover before being forced into 4 hours of cycling through classes, an hour of lunch, and 3 more hours of classes before finally going home. Not exactly Twilight's definition of a paradise. The library was more her definition of a paradise. It was quiet, she was surrounded by her favorite things in the world, and girls like Bella never went there. It was perfect. Twilight found her personal abode fast, and quickly took refuge, grabbing one of her thousands of books from the shelf and delving into the peace and tranquility of ink, paper, and imagination for the next 30 minutes of what would be a day in hell. Therefore, she took every bit of that time with utmost glee and free will. Far away from Canterlot High in High Hills National Park in the oldest tree in existence, a whole different type of day in hell was commencing for a young and deadly girl. She had crossed a line that she had been forced to cross out of self-defense. A line so thin that the end punishment could resort in death. The very line that Sunset Shimmer had crossed the night that she had saved Twilight from assured death. While it was 3 days after the situation, the local news had made the death of Voltaire, a vampire lord that had nearly lured Twilight into the feeding grounds that night, all but private. While it was out of self-defense, Voltaire was one of the royal vampire races, and Sunset had no right in intervening with a royal claiming their dinner. Her actions were out of line and against the natural order of the vampire race altogether. Now, the punishment of Sunset's actions were being decided by the other royal vampire lords, and Sunset had no say in it. Less to say, the vampire justice system was corrupted and fixed to favor only the royals. The main reason Sunset wasn't even trying to fight against the current predicament she was in. Self-defense to the royals was murder, and they never listened to reason. Sunset had tried to blind Voltaire to avoid being recognized, but apparently he had caught sight of her and his family had seen the attack through his vision as well. A cruel realization that Sunset had hung her head at upon the royals knocking at her family's tree. Her parents had pleaded to the royals to kill them instead, but the royals had shaken their heads at the proposition and apparently had resorted to a solution other than death. Sunset had caught a hint of this because normally death sentences were summed up in less than a minute, but this had gone overnight and had fallen down to a unanimous vote by all of the highest royals to see if the compromise made was suitable as punishment. Sunset had been locked in her room over the time of the debate, so she could only hear the voices being made, but she knew nothing of what the compromise was. The only royal that had declined the compromise was Voltaire's brother, Moleskin. It was completely understandable why he had chosen death over the compromise. Who wouldn't want their brother's murderer given the same fate? Sunset personally had no remorse for her actions, despite it being unintentional. She had only aimed to blind Voltaire, not kill him. She and Voltaire had never gotten along, and being a royal snob, he bended the rules multiple times. Sunset had grown tired of him abusing the rules of their supposed natural order, and decided to bend the rules herself by sabotaging his hunt and blinding him for good. The train hitting and killing him was not part of her plan, but she had smiled at the carnage, thinking she had beaten the royals. Despite her fate being decided, she still smiled at Voltaire's demise proudly, continuing to listen to the debate below her floorboards of ancient wood. The debate was almost over, and she wasn't even scared. As each hour passed by and she paced her room in boredom, she could only wonder if she had saved that purple-haired girl in time. Normally she could care less about mortals, but the fact that this involved Voltaire made it different. It bothered her that she actually cared for a mortal's well-being, when vice versa probably wouldn't end the same way. Humans despised her race, which is why they were occupied in a place that no mortal visited anymore. Rising Hills National Park used to be a place to visit to recognize the history of the now thriving populace known as Canterlot City. Now, it was a torn and worn wasteland of cobwebs of fallen trees, decrepit cabins built by the first settlers, and a tangled fence bordering the place with "Do Not Enter" and "No Trespassing" sun-bleached signs. Sunset and her family had settled there not long after Sunset was born, and had lived there undisturbed by human interaction for 16 years. This was their own personal populace, hidden amongst a society of husks with beating hearts. The day had dragged into the late hours, and at long last, it seemed that the debate had closed. Heavy footsteps made their way up the far stairway and down the corridor to Sunset's room, while Sunset just prepared for the results of whatever compromise had been decided. The door creaked open, and standing in the doorway was Raz, the top royal of the vampire race. He was dressed in black robes with his face hid away by the top hood. His skin was ancient and crippled like the wood of their current location. He had talons for fingertips that were laced with age, sturdy and unbreakable, and his height was enough to intimidate anyone in his sights. "Come, child. We are waiting for you," he said calmly. His voice consisted of the rumble of an earthquake and ancient heritage. It rumbled Sunset's ears as she followed Raz down, hearing his deep and raspy breathing in between each separate step. In the living room were 5 other similarly dressed royals and Sunset's mother and father, standing in worry and anxiety. One royal, Moleskin, eyed Sunset with a great fury, to which Sunset just ignored and continued to await the results of 2 days' worth of debating. Raz addressed the situation back into session, walking from Sunset and turning to face her again. "We have come to an agreement that out of your parents' greatest pleas for your mercy has been unanimously decided," Raz confirmed, continuing. "The debate has been decided by a conclusion of 5-1. The 5 being in the favor of Sunset Shimmer to live under the condition that she never intervenes in the company of a royal's duties as long as she continues to live." Sunset was shocked and went to smile at this conclusion up until Raz spoke further on. "However, due to the conditions of your actions resulting in death, by order of the Treaty of Vampiric Peace and Order, forged in 1786 by the first vampire lords, a life must be sacrificed in return by vampire law. If no sacrifice is offered, the debate and compromise results will be rendered null and void." Sunset nearly lost her stomach. "You can't be serious. What kind of philosophical nonsense is that?" Sunset barked in rage. "It is not, my dear," Raz obliged. "Unless there is a sacrifice offered, your head will be offered as your punishment." "I object to that claim, seeing I know how you royal snobs can be. Show me proof that this "a life for another" nonsense is written in history." "While you are in no position to throw objections or demand for historic documentation, I will oblige. Therein, if you would, please provide our young Sunset with the treaty." Sunset recognized that name as well, and knew that he was Raz's little right-hand servant. The skinny-robed man pulled a tube from his sleeve and handed it to Raz, who untightened one end and slid out a rolled-up piece of paper with crinkled edges and a base color of pale beige. It seemed to fit the bill as historic documentation well, and Sunset's confidence had started to dwindle at the sight of the ancient document. Raz unrolled the ancient parchment, scanned it with his bony finger, then turned the paper to where Sunset could see the fine-printed document well. "Section 6D. If any vampire is to slaughter another of their own kind, they must be executed, or a sacrifice can be offered as a substitute for execution." Raz read and confirmed. Sunset eyed the documentation with disgust and hurt, falling to her knees in defeat. Raz retreated the treaty back to safety and resumed the session. "Now, unless a sacrifice is offered, Sunset will be executed by law," Raz addressed with might. The room stood still for the next minute or so, both from the shock and dread of the truth. With no volunteers, Raz proceeded to picking a broken Sunset up by her shirt collar. Only then did Sunset's fear burst into overdrive, screams escaping her mouth along with tears. She tried to fight against the mighty lord, but her attempts of escape were mere taps to Raz's rough and ancient flesh. Sunset was pulled into a chokehold, and having given up on even trying to escape Raz's grasp, she just closed her eyes, ready to meet death. A pause followed that seemed to last forever, but at the end of it, Sunset felt the grasp loosen. Then she heard a shriek, opening her eyes to her mother on her knees. "Take me! I'll sacrifice myself for her freedom. Let her go!" Raz released his grip a little, keeping a good hold on Sunset. "Are you certain about this?" Raz questioned. "You realize your decision is final, and that once it is made, you cannot go back against your word." "Yes, I am certain." Sunset's mother, Starry Dawn, surrendered. "Clearly the murderer has made her choice," Moleskin interrupted from across the room. "Let's do our brother right, and let her serve the punishment she deserves." "Silence, Moleskin," Raz commanded. "You have no word in this matter. We must follow the order of our race." Moleskin folded his arms in defeat, continuing to ice Sunset with rage and pure hatred. "If you are certain, then you are agreeing here and now to falling to certain death. Do you still agree that you are certain of your choice, Starry Dawn?" "Yes." "Then by the power invested in me, Sunset Shimmer shall be spared, and you shall be executed in her place as a sacrifice." Raz released Sunset and turned his attention to Starry, picking her up in the same manner as Sunset. Still recovering from her lack of breath, Sunset saw the horror unfold before her eyes, her mother gripped tightly in Raz's grasp. I love you both," Starry said through oncoming tears. Sunset could only mutter out a single word before she heard a sound that she would never forget for the rest of her eternal life. "Mom!" A deafening snap filled the room, spelling the end for Starry Dawn. Raz released Starry to the floor, the husk hitting the floor with a cold thump that sent Sunset and her father in a race to the lifeless corpse. Both collided on top of the body, falling to tears and despair. "Pleasure doing business with you," Raz coldly stated. "Remember our agreement, child, and don't let your mother's sacrifice have been for nothing." Sunset turned from her mother's body and stared at the towering vampire lord with unadulterated anger and rage. She screamed, her fangs glistening in the light and her eyes glowing a fiery crimson red as she attempted to lunge out and attack. Her father stopped her, holding her back between shoves, punches, kicks, and even bites, up until the 6 royals were gone and her rage turned into exhaustion and mourning over her mother's corpse as the sun set over the horizon. The detention center wasn't the living conditions Bella was used to living in, from the dress code to the disgusting food that she had already thrown up from twice. The beds were like sleeping on concrete floors, and the smell was a mix of body odor, piss, and a damp basement or cellar. The thing she could say she was thankful for was a solo cell and the fact that she was getting bailed out tomorrow. While her parents weren't happy, she didn't care, not knowing the value of a dollar or credit card. One more night in this concrete trap, and that was it. She got charged with too many things to count. Possession of alcohol, drugs, underage drinking, drug use, having drunk minors on her property, multiple noise complaints prior to Twilight and Serena's arrival, being higher than a kite upon examination, and being over the legal limit of alcohol. Less to say, her parents didn't want to deal with it and just threw her ass in detention for a few nights as punishment. After one visit and putting on the fakest display of pity imaginable that her parents bought without a second glance, she was bought a bailout and probation. Now, she sits in her cell, unable to sleep over her excitement to go home in about 16 hours, something she'd come to regret the coming morning. She had top bunk all to herself, so even in young adult jail, she's somehow getting spoiled. Only true brats are that lucky. "Out tomorrow, Bella," she sang to herself. "Then we can go home to our comfy bed and mommy and daddy's cooking. Not to mention, I'm going to track down whoever made that call and teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Bet it was that bitch, Twilight, playing it out to intentionally get me in here. No matter. I'll worry about that when it's important." She finally turned her body and closed her eyes to go to sleep, giving the rest of the block of inmates peace at last. It wasn't long after, though, that she heard footsteps approach the outside of her cell and open the door. This surprised Bella, seeing all of the doors were set for lockdown an hour ago, so no guards should have been active. She just decided to play along with the situation, not wanting to foil her chances of getting out tomorrow. "Can I help you?" Bella proposed. The guard was dressed in casual uniform, which caused Bella no alarm as he stepped into the cell. "As a matter of fact, you can," he responded, walking further in. "You were part of that case involving Twilight Sparkle, right?" Bella paused, wondering why the guard hadn't known that coming here, and more importantly, why he chose to come to her cell for questioning so late at night. "Yeah? Why?" "Oh, my apologies." The guard started. "It's regarding a new lead we have on said case. I need to ask you a few things for confirmation." "Seems fair enough. All right, I'll comply." "Very good. First, and this is very critical, do you happen to know Miss Sparkle's address?" That question made Bella stop and think. Why would a guard ask that? Wouldn't her parents have provided the address in the first questioning session? Everything about this spelled wrong, so she decided to give a somewhat truth, but not enough to give this guard any lead. "I recall hearing it years ago, but I don't know exactly where she lives or the exact address." She somewhat lied. What followed next clarified that Bella had made a huge mistake in choosing to lie, the guard grabbing the door from the inside and ripping it closed. "What the?" Bella's voice had fallen to a mere shiver as the guard turned to face her again. "If you want to live, I suggest you stop lying," the guard threatened, causing Bella to fall to full fear. The guard approached closer and closer, until Bella was held against the wall with inhuman strength and his face was right in her own. "I will not ask again," he commanded with a strength that sent Bella into a paralyzed state. "What do you want from me?" she shrieked in fear. I swear, I don't know. It was a long time ago when I was last there. I don't know. Please, let me go." The guard only muttered a laugh that had turned into a demonic rumble that made Bella's demeanor only fall deeper into terror. "You will give me the truth one way or another. Mommy and Daddy ain't here to save you, and aren't coming to save you." His voice reverberated in her skull, each echo pounding against the inside of her head like a hive of angry bees. Bella could only cower against his strength and dominance over her, so she did what she does best, pleaded and put on a horrid act to escape. Only this time, the acting was real. I want to go home. Tears escaped her eyes, but the guard only smiled at her suffering, still holding her hostage against the wall. Don't worry. You'll be there before you know it. That is, after I've had my meal. Bella's screams were the last thing heard that night, until the door was opened again, and the tranquil calm came again after the footsteps of the guard departed. Chapter 3. Darkness Looms. Tuesday had been a drag for Twilight, and she had been relieved that Bella had been absent upon her return to school on Monday. She knew she'd have to confront her eventually, but a couple days without Bella flaunting about herself constantly was quite the relief Twilight had needed. Between the blazing summer heat and Bella's egotistic nature, it was beyond relentless torture to anybody's senses, so she took it without complaint or second thought. She wiped sweat residing on her forehead from her brow, trying to focus on her current ride back to her house. The temperature that day had hit a record peak, so even the air conditioner's cool waves escaping the ducts didn't ease Twilight's already unsettled attitude. It had been a terrible day at Canterlot High. Her performances in almost every category of academics had been poor. She didn't know why her physical strength in both her body and mind had been poor, but it was obvious, and she knew it. Sure, Twilight wasn't the most giddy individual, but if there was one thing she didn't normally lack on, it was her studies. She guessed that it may have been the dreaded heat, but at the same time, she knew that wasn't the cause. Hot weather wouldn't stop her, and she knew that for sure. These conflicting thoughts made it all the harder to drive straight, but luckily she was at the turn to the street where she lived. A sight she enjoyed, just wanting her day to be over and done with. Her plan was to just heat some leftovers, lock the doors and windows, and let Beethoven's symphonies carry her into a deep sleep. Simple, sweet, and free of any drama that could potentially send her over the edge. She pulled into the driveway and got out of her metal trap, locking the doors and not even bothering to collect her school luggage. For all she cared, that heavy shit could stay in that thing for the rest of the week. She had no reason to carry it in, so what was the point? Upon entering the cool and calm house, Twilight locked the door and just led herself to the fridge, finding some spaghetti. She threw some onto a plate, sprinkled some water onto the noodles, and after 4 minutes of heating her makeshift dinner, she dragged herself to her room and shut the door with a moderate slam. She set the scorching hot plate on her nightstand and plopped down onto her unmade bed, staring at her bedroom ceiling for a good few minutes. She didn't know what she was doing, but didn't care at the same time. It was relaxing to her, so she just allowed it to happen. The essence of her dinner, as much as her grumbling stomach yelling at her for consumption of the meal, eventually forced her out of her embrace with her bed sheets, sitting back up and grabbing the plate rested on her nightstand. The dinner rested in her lap, the heat slowly seeping its way through the fabric of her jeans as she grabbed the fork and proceeded to stab it into the serving. She didn't mind the mild amount of heat embracing her lap as she twirled the fork into a dance with her dinner, eventually forming a spiraled set of noodles on her utensil. As she went to blow on the spaghetti laced on her fork, a set of knocks interrupted her date with herself. They were heavy knocks, which set Twilight's PTSD from her past home invasion off on full alert. However, the insecurities were replaced with confusion upon a set of words that followed the knocks. "Police, open up." She immediately recognized the officer's voice as the same one that questioned her at the hospital. While she was confused and shocked, she knew he wasn't a threat, so she set her plate aside and worked quickly to the front door, unlocking it and opening it to the sight of the same officer from the hospital in the doorway. His car was parked along the curbside with its lights flashing abruptly, slightly irritating Twilight's eyes as she addressed the officer. "May I help you, officer?" Twilight questioned. "Yes, Miss Sparkle." He started. "I'm Officer Carlson, and I believe you have some information regarding a recent event that occurred." "Such as?" Officer Carlson took a second to exhale a breath and give Twilight a glare that made her shiver. It was clear that he had come on something serious. "Miss Sparkle, how is your relationship with Bella Thompson?" he asked. Twilight was immediately confused. Of all the things that she thought he was going to ask, that wasn't even something she thought would have been an option. She just complied with the situation, having no reason to lie. "Bella?" She stuttered in surprise. "We aren't the best of friends, but I don't necessarily hate her or wish her any sort of ill will. Why?" The officer paused, letting out another long breath. "Would you mind coming with me?" he asked. Twilight swallowed hard, her blood running cold. I'm not in trouble, am I?" She panicked. "No, you're not under arrest, but someone's gonna be," he said calmly. "I think you can help us to figure out who did this." Twilight paused, relieved that she wasn't in any legal trouble, but her confusion still remained. "What happened? Is Bella hurt?" Carlson took a few steps back and turned to where Twilight's sight was met with his patrol car. "It's best you just come with me, Miss Sparkle." Hunting had never been a challenge for Sunset. From the day she had been old enough to hunt efficiently, she had been naturally gifted at it. Her senses were very strong and sensitive, and she could track down and claim a meal in less than 5 minutes out in the open. She even outperformed the Royals, but because of her choice of what to feed on, she was an outcast to them, despite her hunting skills being of the highest level. Her family's choice of meal had always been animals rather than humans, and it wasn't because of taste preference, it was simply due to the fact that hunting humans had always seemed wrong and immoral to them. Because of their beliefs, Sunset had gotten teased by her fellow vampiric kin growing up, and while she hated it then, now she found her family's beliefs all too true. One hunt, she had gone against her parents and ended up hunting down a human. A young male athlete that, while strong and healthier than the average human, had stood no chance against an immortal being. While Sunset easily had the advantage and could have pounced, something had held her back from finishing the task. The smell of his blood had been intoxicating to her, but something in her mind had forced her to fly away and never try hunting humans since then. Still, to this day, she couldn't explain why she had stopped, and just hunts her usual preferences: deer, rabbits, squirrels, basically any casual woodland creature that pumps that sweet crimson nectar. Sometimes she can hunt multiple meals if she wishes, but she normally prefers one small serving in between her usual cycle of feedings. One deer could last her up to 4 days without another feeding if she was lucky to run into one on a hunt. The only thing currently on her mind was letting some steam off after the grisly demise of her mother. Her mother had always been her hunting partner, so hunting was her only way of having some connection to her mother. Her father dealt mostly with the royal shenanigans, and did his best to keep order in their little society from the humans. It had seemed to work well enough, up until the previous night. Now Sunset wasn't sure what her father was going to do about the corrupt order the royals called vampire law. More like bullshit law, Sunset thought to herself. She raised her ears to the open forest, listening for the rustling of any woodland creature that she could detect. First, the north. Mild wind and the slight bristle of leaves. East. The local river flowing and one frog croaking on its edge. Poisonous. Sunset muttered to herself upon the discovery of the frog. South. Leaves rustling in the breeze, chirping birds, bones crushing from the might of a bear's jaw. Sunset braced herself for the fast attack on the bear, up until she heard another sound not even a yard from the bear. It was a mild yelp culminated with two other sets that Sunset recognized well, and immediately stopped her from proceeding with her attack. Nothing else needs to lose their mother. She choked out in defeat, focusing her senses back to the forest. West. More wind, a squirrel skittering up a tree, hooves walking gently along a trail. Perfect. Sunset stated, preparing herself for the quick pounce. I need a good meal after last night. With careful focus, Sunset caught the scent of her prey and took off like a rocket through the thick woods. The run was like a flash to Sunset, while to a human, it was more like nothing. Sunset was untraceable by the naked human eye at the speed she was going, and the only thing that could track her was another vampire. It was one of the perks that came with vampirism, and Sunset was one of the fastest at it. Within the blink of an eye, Sunset had her prey grasped and injected with her venom as if it were simple work. The deer still spasmed, but Sunset's strength was far more powerful and not even a match for her. Her fangs glistened with the crimson glow of the animal's blood in the moonlight as she took in her meal with full satisfaction. The deer fell limp not long after that, and Sunset only continued to enjoy her well-earned meal under the stars. Sunset downed the entire life supply of the mammal in no less than 10 minutes, and even found herself crying in the midst of the feasting. The main reason was because it reminded her of her first hunt with her mom, and the realization of what the pompous royals had done to her had struck her hard in between her thick crimson meal. She hadn't meant to drink the animal free of all of its blood, but her emotions had unintentionally caused her to. She stood up, wiping her fangs free of the red tint that now glossed them, and looked up to the moon, reminiscing about her mother. 9 years earlier. Wait, so it's better to hunt when the moon is full than when it's not? A young Sunset questioned her mother, both sprawled out underneath the stars. The best time to hunt is when you are most lethal. Starry Dawn confirmed to her daughter by her side, giving her hunting tips that she was taught as a kid. The moon aids us in both hunger and agility. We're much more lethal and dangerous under a full moon, Sunset. Seems kinda the opposite, because aren't vampires supposed to be stealthy and remain in the shadows? Starry giggled at her daughter's theory, even if it was partly true. Yes, we are supposed to remain in the shadows, but we also cannot go without feeding. We can't be in the shadows all the time, Sunset. We have to come out every now and then. But didn't the royals teach us to be one with the shadows and darkness? Do we just ignore everything they taught us? The royals have their ways of teaching, but we have our own. Why do you think we pulled you out of their ways of teaching and prefer to teach you on our own? Because you don't like them? Starry lost her laughter, coughing in between her words in surprise at the sudden response. It's more that the royals have a way of teaching that isn't what your father and I want for you. One day, you'll move out of your father and I's care, and we want you to have proper guidance and knowledge on how to survive on your own in this world. How to hunt, who to trust, and most importantly, how to live your life happily. But I'm happy here with you and Daddy. Why would I ever choose to leave both of you? Starry paused and looked up to the sky, admiring the haunting glow of the full moon. A smile crept across her lips as she turned to her confused and troubled daughter, placing a free hand on the right side of Sunset's head and running her fingers through her fiery hair in a dance. She stroked her daughter's hair comfortingly as she answered her daughter's question. You'll understand someday, dear. Starry answered, following by kissing her daughter's forehead and continuing to stroke her hair. Sunset hadn't realized that she unintentionally was stroking her own hair coming out of the memory. It was a fond memory that she remembered well over the years. She lowered the hand she had been flowing through her hair and used it to wipe tears from her eyes. In the midst of moonlight and cool summer night air, she could feel a presence with her, and she smiled at it, knowing her mom was there. I miss you, Mom. She choked out. The somewhat reunion between mother and daughter was broken up by a distant noise, something that caught Sunset's attention immediately, given what was being said. It sounded like a pair of three males discussing something to do with a meal. All Sunset had cared about was one name mentioned, and she immediately knew she had to look into this. Yeah, that Twilight sparkle ain't gonna be around for much longer. She dashed in the direction of the conversation and quickly found three other vampires walking in the pale moonlit woods. Her arrival wasn't noticed, surprisingly enough, so she played stealth for the time being, taking refuge in a thick upper part of a tree. Wait, what do you mean she's not going to be around for much longer? One of the male occupants questioned. Sunset tried to distinguish the men, but the darkness made it hard to tell exactly who they were. Sunset just continued to stalk them in the trees and listened further into the conversation. Dalco got all he needed from Moleskin from that other girl in the detention center. He even got a damn meal out of her. The raspy-voiced attendee clarified. Dalco was a name Sunset recognized. He was one of Moleskin's weasels, but that wasn't the important thing to Sunset. She was more interested in what Moleskin was planning, seeing there was definitely a plan in motion. So, what's the plan when he gets this girl out of the picture? Why would he even be out to kill a mortal? He didn't say. Maybe some rare blood or some shit? Seems like something Moleskin would try for. A little extreme though for a mortal. That's what I said. Let's get home. We don't need anybody getting near of whatever Moleskin is planning. Sure thing, Alos. The three dashed off like lightning bolts, and Sunset descended from the tree. The last name mentioned wasn't even familiar to Sunset, and that made the current mystery all the more mysterious. All she knew, based on what she had just heard, was that Moleskin was out to kill Twilight, the girl she had saved, and was most likely up to more than just murdering a mortal. Something came over Sunset almost immediately, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Normally she never intervened with mortals or even cared if a mortal lived or died, but for some reason, then and there, she felt compelled to intervene with Moleskin's plan. Doing that, though, would interfere with the bullshit order she had just barely escaped breaking with her head on her shoulders. Go home, Sunset, she said to herself. Unless you want to end up like Mom, go home. She tried to erase the thought of saving Twilight again from her mind, but something held it there, just like that something that had held her back from killing that human. She had walked only a few yards before she came to her decision, spreading her wings and cussing herself out as she took flight in the direction of Twilight's house. The ride with Officer Carlson had led to the local hospital where he had found a parking spot and had advised Twilight to get out of the vehicle with a gesture of his hand. Twilight followed, opening the door of the car and following Carlson into the building, unsure of what to expect. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor, a fun jazz tune being the entertainment upon the ascension, and navigated down many pairs of long empty halls up until they turned into the ICU unit through a pair of double doors. It was a very circular unit with a service desk to your right as you walked in, and multiple separate rooms to your left and all around as you continued forward. A nurse assisted Officer Carlson while Twilight gazed around the full unit. It had a sense of sadness and horror, given what sort of cases came into that place. Cancer patients, coma patients, too many deaths to count, and much more. And now, Twilight was here for some reason. "Let's go, Twilight," Carlson commanded, causing Twilight to jump. Twilight nodded and followed him deeper into the unit. They rounded the service desk up until they came to the last room at the end of the right side of the unit. The room was lit and accompanied by balloons and cards off to the side of the bed. When Twilight saw who was in the bed, she nearly lost her stomach. Bella Thompson was in the bed on life support. She was pale and lifeless, heartbeat faint, and skin caked with dried blood from her neck brace down. It was like looking at a dead corpse in a horror movie, and Twilight could barely glimpse at the grisly scene. She eventually lost her school lunch in the closest garbage can, unable to keep her gag reflex at bay. Carlson caught on and quickly escorted Twilight out of the unit and back to his car. It took Twilight a minute to collect herself as Officer Carlson filled her in with some much important details. "She was found that way in her detention cell this morning," Carlson explained. "The door had been displaced from its mechanical parts that allow it to slide open and closed, and the scene had been one of the most disturbing I've ever seen." "Was she alive?" "She was only alive by a flitter of a heartbeat," he replied. "Paramedics lost her on the way to the hospital, but got her back after 3 resuscitator attempts. But she hasn't come to fully since. Once." Twilight paused, holding her hands on the side of her head in disgust and sadness. Who would do this? And how? "That's what we're trying to figure out, Miss Sparkle. And while I appreciate your compliance, you are considered a suspect in this case." Twilight shuddered, losing her temper between the accusation and the fact that her day had already been bad enough. "Do I look like someone able to break into a detention center, force open a mechanical door, and cause this amount of physical pain to Bella?" she snapped. "We're not pointing fingers specifically at you, Twilight, but given everything that has happened as of late, we have to consider you a suspect. But that's all you are for now." Twilight just folded her arms and sat back in her seat in complete irritation. "Take me home. Now," she demanded. Carlson didn't fight and did as she asked, starting up the car and driving her back home. The drive was quiet for the most part, and neither of them spoke a word. All Twilight could think about was the sight of Bella's body, and probably would never forget it as long as she lived. The fact that she was a suspect in a potential murder case made her want to cry. She had never wanted to kill anybody, so to even be considered a murderer was enough to make her feel sick to her stomach. They pulled into the curb of Twilight's house about 20 minutes later, and Twilight gladly exited the patrol car with a slam. She had started to walk up towards the driveway when she heard the officer call out to her again. She knew the law well, so she just complied with him, remaining quiet and displeased. "Make sure to stick around," he informed. "Just comply and everything will be fine. All right?" Twilight didn't give any response except by glaring daggers at him until he had left her line of sight in his car. Once he was gone, Twilight exhaled a long breath of air and started towards the steps, slipping out her keys from her pocket. However, something stopped her in her tracks. In the driveway, her car erupted to life and Twilight had immediately resorted to objecting to the situation. "Hey, that's my car!" she yelled, pulling out her cell phone. "Get out, or I'm calling the police!" Nothing happened for a moment, as Twilight had started to dial 911 to prove her claim, but was surprised when she heard her driver door open and shut, the carjacker coming into view slowly in front of the headlights. "Would you rather deal with someone accusing you of murder or live?" the carjacker questioned. "Is that a threat?" Twilight questioned in return, showing the phone screen with the number dialed to prove she wasn't joking. "No, it's a fact, Twilight, and unless we get you out of here, you'll be dead by dawn," the carjacker warned. "Take it from someone who has saved your life before that you are in serious danger." Twilight jumped at the name drop, not sure whether or not to push the call button. "Who are you? And how do you know my name?" Twilight commanded. The supposed carjacker stepped further into the lights, and immediately, Twilight's mind flashed back to the description she had of her savior at the party: a hair of fire. In the headlights was a semi-tall girl with hair that resembled fire, dressed in a black leather jacket, ripped jeans, and ankle-high black boots. The perfect description of the partygoer that saved her from Brandon. "My name is Sunset, and unless you want to die a horrible death from someone else hunting you as we speak, you need to trust me." Twilight lowered her phone, feeling safe for some reason. This girl could have switchblades in her inner jacket pockets for all she knew, but yet she was lowering her guard without any worries. She stood her ground, calming down. "How do I know I can trust you?" Twilight proposed. "Aside from the party incident, I have no idea who you are or know anything about you. I've never even seen you before." "What if I told you that if you come with me, I can get that officer off your back and prove your innocence?" Sunset countered. Twilight bit her lip at the offer. She knew jack squat about this girl, but she really wanted Officer Dickweed off her back and this whole mess resolved. She pondered for a long moment, pushing Sunset's patience to its peak. "Ugh, decide quick," Sunset warned. "I didn't have to come and save you from assured death and could have just left you for dead. The longer we wait, the more likely he is to show up and kill you." Twilight jumped at that, and with a very conflicted grunt of defeat, she agreed to Sunset's offer. "Ugh, fine, but I'm holding you to your promises." "Fine, now hurry and get in." Twilight listened, rushing to the passenger door and opening it with ease, the casual creaking sound accompanying it. She slid into the car seat and shut the door quickly, Sunset joining in the adjacent seat of the vehicle. Sunset shut the door and quickly buckled up, Twilight following and continuing to eye the girl. Twilight had no idea if she had just been kidnapped or potentially avoided death for the second time now thanks to the same person. Either way, she was along for the ride now, and with a shift into reverse, the car rolled out of the driveway. One hard turn to the right and shift into first later, The car accelerated off to somewhere yet to be discovered.